Look, remember, this isn't just a story about a homicide investigation. We're trying to communicate a piece of the Christian worldview in a way that's not overwhelming. So this is not going to be like everything that could be said about Christianity or about the gospel or even about human value. We're just going to kind of put our foot in it enough so that the reader can read that and say, yeah, like I don't even think you would know necessarily this is a Christian book until you're pretty far into it. And then like you're in it. Yeah. Okay. So there you go. So yeah. So we wanted that to be the case because we didn't want we don't want to be off-putting. Like we're trying to be winsome in this. And it turns out that the Christian worldview is winsome. And often it's not because the people who communicate it aren't communicating it the way it really is. But we thought we better be careful here to make sure that we have a really true gritty story that has got whatever happens in homicide investigations. So it is, I don't think it's a PG story. I think that if you look at what people are watching on TV, it's pretty accessible. I think now people that have seen it, I think we thought, are we writing an adult graphic novel that is like really too gruesome for young people? But everyone who's read it now is like, yeah, junior hires could read this because they're seeing it already, what they're seeing on their phones. So I think that it's real. We've written it. We tried to be as real as we could with this kind of investigation.
Yeah. No, Jimmy, I give you flowers for the in reading it. I said it in the review. There's like the yellow box narrator pages. I'm like, the way you constructed those, it does go along with the art as well. That was like the booster for those. But I was also like, very rare. I say it, very rare. Do I not get bored of exposition dialogue? A lot of like pages of just exposition of character exposition. And like outside perspective, like that narrator, all seeing eyes telling you this, that, and everything. I read them like, oh, this is really interesting. So you did a really great job in that regard.
Well, that's good.
Well, thank you. I think I was fearful that I was. I think I started off feeling like, hey, there's a lot of modern comics that I had been buying that I felt like, oh man, I wish there was a little bit more to it. Mostly like from like Marvel and DCs and stuff like that. And then I'm like spending money that I don't really want to spend. And then I'm like, oh man, there just wasn't a lot. So then I wanted to I want this to be dense. I wanted to do as much as possible. But then I think I got fearful that maybe we'd done too much. I don't want you to feel like, yeah, it's like work to get through it. Part of my problem is two of my big favorite comics writers are Chris Claremont, who did the X-Men back in the days, and I still like to this day. You could buy the next he's done. And then when I was growing up, I was, and I mean, he's known for like enormous amounts of writing, which I enjoy, but probably he's like the exception to the rule. Like I probably shouldn't be trying to compete with him in that area. He's very verbose. He's putting a lot of words on the page. And then the other guy that I liked when I was in high school and I was just coming up was Brian Michael Bendis, was like at the peak of his popularity doing Daredevil and stuff. But he's also a guy who writes a lot. And so I see like even in the early pages of this graphic novel, I'm like, ooh, I can see that I'm maybe straying a little bit too heavy, but I hope that we got a good pacing there after as things went on, as we were learning how to do this thing. But I just wanted I wanted to feel like when you were reading this, you're getting a lot out of it. There is like some substance here. This isn't going to be, you're not going to have a 10-page sequence with like 3 lines of dialogue and a bunch of pictures, which can sometimes be great, but I just didn't want to feel like, oh, I raced through that comic and there wasn't much there.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, because there's a couple of guys that I listen to on podcasts, and I don't get as much chance to do as I'd like. I'd like to listen to them more, but I might listen a couple times a week, and they're doing 5 days a week, these guys, and one is a super fast talker. So in an hour, you're going to get so much information. He's just going to blow right through it. As a matter of fact, people complain he talks too fast. There's too much information. It's like drinking water out of a fire hose, blah, blah, blah. The other guy will unpack maybe 6 ideas, 6 stories in an hour. And so each one's going to take 10 minutes to unpack. And you can definitely listen to this guy at 2 speed and probably be okay. I think for us, my books, I always worry about, like, I grew up pretty strapped for money. but you didn't have a lot of financial resources. And then I became a cop, and you're not going to make a heck of a lot of money as a cop either. So for me to buy a book and spend $15 on a book, if you're, and eventually these books will come into that range. When they start off, they'll eventually come in. Even my apologetics books, they might start off at $20, but eventually, as you sell them, they will come down to about this on Amazon, about $15. But for me to spend $15 on a book when I was, a younger guy, that was prohibitive. I mean, I didn't have $15 in discretionary income to spend on a book. And so when I became an author, I thought, well, look, if we're going to end up having to charge that, because that's what the publisher sets, I don't get to set that price, then we're going to I want to make sure we pack this thing so that people feel like they got their $15 worth. And so that view has always guided what I create. I mean, I want to illustrate it. Do I need illustrations in a book? No, I'm not talking about this book. I'm talking about my apologetics books. Do I need illustrations in Cold Case Christianity? Well, probably not really, but I put 300 in there because I felt like I want those. Now, I'm an artist, but I didn't feel like I could do this. And people ask me, did you draw this? Because I draw everything else. I'm like, no, that's a whole nother level of art that is truly. And when I see these guys that Jimmy's talking about that ended up working on our book, when I see their other stuff, I'm like, wow, yeah, there's some really gifted artists in this space. And they're very, also one of the things about being a gifted artist is not just that it looks good, is that you can do it quickly because you're an artist. I've seen guys who can, I'm trying to rough out the scene, and get the proportions right. And then I'll go over it more with ink, and get all, no, these guys are starting in a corner, and sometimes they'll just start before I can etch a sketch. They're completely done with the thing. And you're going, wow, that's a gift. So we're just glad that we had somebody who was gifted to do that, right? So,
which is, what is it like the general breakdown of the storyline behind Xplanations? Because here there's going to be another volume, and just like how much of it, most I will add, how much of it is, as you say, it's inspired by some of the cases. But if you could give me like a arbitrary number, or like this has happened, but we added our own spice to it kind of thing for this story. But our spoilers, of course, because I made sure not to do mine with any spoilers. It's like, if you could give me because knowing the rule of crime, there's like wild things that happen. So like, which one is like actual, what percentage of it is like this actually happened, and what percent of it is like we made this up from scratch?
Okay, I'll let Jimmy answer that question.
Well, I don't want to diminish the excitement of this by saying it's all made up. I think, especially because I'm still working in law enforcement, I was very sensitive to the idea. I don't want to be telling true stories in the sense that these are, you could read this book and you could identify, oh, this is this victim from this place, and this is their real name, and I'm giving away either confidential information that should protect the victim or confidential information that's just not available to the public or whatever. So in that sense, it's not that these events actually occurred, but what we wanted to do was create stories that felt real. These could happen. They're not, hey, this is a comic book. We're trying to tell a story, and we're trying to move fast and make it exciting. So I don't know that these are like, there's not a serial killer attacking people in LA County like every day. It's still rare to find a serial killer. But if a killer like this was actually out there, what would the team of detectives probably look like, and what would they probably do? I think that those things are real in that sense. These characters are all very typical. I think probably when we look at the individual characters that are in the team of detectives that are investigating this crime, each one of those, like my dad would probably say, oh, this person is totally like this person I worked with. And I would probably say, they're totally like this other person that I worked with, and they're totally two different people, but they're just similar enough, because in law enforcement, you get the job kind of ends up molding you in a certain way. There's certain personality and characteristics that you could take on that might make you a better cop. It might not make you a better person, but it might make you a better cop. And the main kind of character in this story is Murph. Murph is a disgruntled, kind of bitter old cop who's at the end of his career, but he loves being a cop. This is his whole identity. And if you were like that, you actually probably would be a really good cop, because if all that you live for is doing police work, you're going to be really effective because you're giving your whole heart to it. But because you're giving your whole heart to it, you're going to be constantly kind of impacted by all the negative, evil things that you're going to experience over a whole career, especially if you're working in homicides where now you're constantly dealing with violent crime and people doing really heinous things to each other. What are you going to end up like? You're going to probably end up like Murph. And there's a ton of people. Murph is not a real person, but there's a ton of Murphs out there in law enforcement. I mean, it's a trope in like a lot of detective stories, but it's because it's very true. And that's kind of where some of the inspiration for the story came from. Yes, we want to tell a detective story that feels real, but one of the things that I've been a Christian the whole time that I was a police officer, and I noticed that the people around me, and including me at different times, really took a lot of identity in their work. This was like who they were. They would let their marriages fall apart as long as they could get onto the special team or get the promotion they were looking for, because what was going to validate them and give them value was at work above everything else. And this can be really great if you want to be a really good police officer, if the job is all that you have, and no, you might be really good when you're at work, but it's not really good to answer why are you valuable, because in the end, like Murph is experiencing at the beginning of the story, Murph at the very beginning, even though his whole identity is tied around being this great cop, this great detective, he has nothing else, and now he's eligible for retirement. And what happens when he retires? Who is he even going to be? Will he have any value at all? All in his mind, all his value comes from what he does. And I thought that was a perfect segue over into Christian apologetics, because there's this great apologetic argument which has to answer the question. I think this is a question everyone has to answer, which is, do human beings have value? And if so, where does it come from? If you think everyone has equal value, or even if you think, no, some people really do have more value than others, regardless of your opinion, you have to be able to point to something to say, this is why they actually have value that goes beyond my opinion, or the opinion of the culture, what my boss thinks of me, what my wife thinks of me, these things that can change day to day.
Yeah.
So the story is fictional, but I hope that it is real in the sense that the characters feel real. And this is a real problem that we all have to wrestle with. I mean, even outside of law enforcement, is where do we get our value from? Are we really valuable? And how do we answer that?
Yeah, and I'll just add one last thing. I know I don't want us to run out of time here, but I'll just take up a few more minutes to say something about that. I think Jimmy's right. Why is it that you see these shows on TV where it seems like there are these like caricatures of cops or detectives that always appear? And you could probably just do a quick scan of like the top 10 detective stories on TV, detective shows, and you can probably find the similar types in each series. They've just been given slightly different names or whatever, but why is that? I think there's a danger. There's a real thing that happens. You can imagine, do you remember back when I was a kid, they used to have rock tumblers. And what these rock tumblers would do is you put a bunch of different rocks in this machine, and it would roll the rocks in fluid, and eventually it would smooth out the rocks and they would come out really polished. The same way that if you put rocks in a stream and you leave them over time and the water moves them down the stream, that they grind along and they come out at the end, you have smooth pebbles. And I don't care if you started with rough agate or some kind of iron core, or you start with a broken piece of glass. At the end of the process, they all come out looking kind of similar, and they're much worse for wear, but they get, so what happens is that people come into this job and they bring all their individual personalities, but they sometimes come out looking the same. Like it's hard to retain what was you when you came in, that your naivete is going to be taken away from you. A lot of your patience is going to be tested. Your perception of humans is going to probably start to conform to what everybody else's perception is, because you're all seeing the same thing and experiencing the same thing. So this is a book, I hope, that starts to delve into that and just ask the question, like, what makes us unique? What gives us value? That's the idea of the story, is they're hunting a serial killer who is going to target what the culture thinks are increasingly valuable targets. It starts off with somebody who's homeless. And why do we think that that's not worth working? Why do we think that that case is not as important as a celebrity who gets murdered? Why is it that someone like this can get killed in America and nobody will even report it on the news? Yet the celebrity gets killed, it'll be a national, international headline. Like, why do we think that one person has got more value than another? We want to explore that, because we think the best answer for how you could determine someone's value is not in their celebrity, or what they've achieved or how much money they have or what family they came from. It's going to be we are image bearers of the God who created us. And we want to be able to talk about that as a better answer to the question, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't smack you in the face from the very first, panel. If we want to do it in a way that is subtle, and then when all of the characters in this are struggling with the answer, we're going to float an answer that we think is the best answer, but it's also going to leave people, I think, thinking about, well, is that the best answer? And I want to start a conversation. When you read this book, I hope you want to talk about it. And I hope if you give it to somebody, they're going to want to talk to you about it. And that's where these conversations begin, a journey. That's the kind of thing that starts. I've got family members right now who I'm having conversations with them, and it's beginning with questions like this. It turns out if I'd have started with just the gospel, they would have said, yeah, okay, heard it before. But if I can start this way, they realize, no, it turns out the gospel is the good news about salvation. But with that comes the good news about a lot of other things, like human value, like identity, like grounding moral truths, like making sense of the world that we live in. Those things come along with the gospel. And so we want to be able to, and so if you've got people who say, I don't want to hear the gospel, well, how about we just talk about the good things that come along with it? That might open your mind to being willing to listen to the gospel. And that's what we hope this book will do.
No, that's awesome. As you say, it doesn't hit you in the face on page 1. I'll say it hits you in the gut on page 154. Because when I read it, I was like, wow. Really, guys? Well, I covered it in the review because I felt like I have to read this page for the audience. For that page and that ending conversation with Joe and Murph, I was like, it ain't gonna hit you on page 1, but it hits you on that last 10 pages. So it's like, that was, as I said, that was a perfect bow to wrap the book up with, in my opinion. It was like where they're just thinking that just the inspirations and the apologetics background that went into that. I was like, you guys nailed that for me personally. Definitely.
Oh, that's good. That's so good. That's so good to hear. And that's encouraging because that's what's kind of the goal of this. If we'd have done all of this, and had a great action-packed fiction book, and we didn't at least introduce the concepts that caused us to want to do it in the first place, I think we would have missed the mark altogether. So that's encouraging for us to hear, for sure.
Yeah, it's very edifying because this is something that we feel in our gut when we see people struggling and with their sense of purpose or value, especially people we've worked with. And we feel like we have the answer, not like in we want to shove in your face with the answer. Why couldn't you figure it out? But it's like heartbreaking to see someone not see the answer is just God. God has created you and has a purpose for you and sees value in you. And so I'm glad to hear that had some sort of emotional resonance, that somehow the way we were feeling about it came across on the page is very edifying.
That's good. Yeah, for sure.